Welcome to Informed Dissent. This is the news of the week for Saturday, December the 20th. The United States House passes Marjorie Taylor Greene's sponsored bill criminalizing medical gender transition interventions for minors. The House this week passed H.R. 3492, sponsored by Representative MTG, the Republican from Georgia, by a vote of 216 to 211. This would make the provision of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and gender transition surgeries to minors a federal felony. 3 Democrats, Henry Cuellar from Texas, Vicente Gonzalez from Texas, and Don Davis, not Don Draper, from North Carolina, voted in favor, while 4 Republicans, Gabe Evans from Colorado, Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania, Mike Kennedy from Utah, and Mike Lawler from New York, voted against it. The bill now moves over to the Senate, where Republicans currently hold 53 seats, Democrats hold 45 seats, and there are 2 independents who usually caucus with the Democrats. Supporters would need 60 votes to overcome a filibuster to actually fully advance this legislation. Also this week in the House, Dan Crenshaw sponsored a Medicaid funding ban, which also passes. This bill, H.R. 498, the Do No Harm in Medicaid Act, sponsored by Republican and Representative Dan Crenshaw from Texas, passed by a vote of 215 to 201. This bill would prohibit federal Medicaid reimbursement for any puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and certain gender transition procedures for minors. Like H.R. 3492, it will now move to the Senate and will be subjected to that same 60-vote filibuster threshold. Also this week, a lot of news coming out of Washington, D.C. The Trump administration announces proposed restrictions on federal funding. The Department of Health and Human Services, known as HHS, announced proposed regulatory actions that could restrict Medicare, Medicaid, and CHIP funding from hospitals and clinics that provide medical transition interventions to minors. The proposal represents what's being referred to as an escalation in federal involvement. However, this does not create permanent law. This must also proceed through a notice and comment rulemaking period and could be, we believe it will be, modified and challenged in court. The ACLU has also already said they're going to come out and challenge. This week, HHS also terminated multiple federal grants to the American Academy of Pediatrics, totaling approximately $18 million. They cited misalignments with departmental priorities. The grants were not specifically tied to gender medicine. However, am I happy about this? Yes, I am. In New Hampshire, lawmakers advanced legislation that would define male and female in statute based on biological sex. The bill would affect sex-segregated spaces and legal classifications in areas such as education, athletics, and privacy. It reflects a broader legislative trends toward explicitly writing biological sex into law rather than relying on administrative interpretation. Out in California, rapper Nicki Minaj publicly criticized political pressure from California officials, including Governor Gavin Newsom, about aligning with gender identity policy messaging. Media coverage focused on Minaj's perceived political alignment, being MAGA, rather than the actual substance of her objections, highlighting the ongoing cultural tensions around gender policy in entertainment. England faces a legal challenge and a wide public protest over the planned puberty blocker trial. A parents group has filed a legal challenge seeking to halt a new NHS puberty blocker trial. They cited ethical concerns and the limited evidence base identified in the Cass review. This challenge was accompanied this week by a public protest in London opposing the trial and the continued medicalization of children despite unresolved safety questions. We are proud of our friends across the pond for showing up. They gave some excellent speeches that you can find on social media. Finally, a brief nod to this week's unlikely heroes. Marjorie Taylor Greene, in her exit from public representationing, she forced this House vote many believed would never happen. Dan Crenshaw for moving forward the federal funding question out onto the floor. And to the HHS regulatory nerds, they methodically worked through rulemaking to remind everyone that sometimes bureaucracy really does matter. Before we wrap up, a quick shout out to this week's tweet of the week, brought to us by Women and Women Are Real. This video using movie footage from the fall of the Nazi regime, edited with Chase Strangio cast as Hitler. We applaud it for its dark humor, sharp editing, and very much the moment of the moment. Also, Lauren is sick again. Seriously, please wish her well in the comments. She was not able to join us for segment 2, where we're joined by Dr. Laura T. from Canada. And so Corey and I took on this entire week solo. Finally, a quick reminder, we will be off next week for the holiday. We'll be back after the break with our next edition of Informed Dissent. Thank you for being here, for listening. As always, stay informed and ready to dissent. No. Hi, welcome to Informed Dissent. This is the part of the show where we often will discuss the news of the week, and this week was kind of a whopper. And it was such a whopper that it knocked Lauren out cold, and she's sick yet again, overwhelmed by everything that's occurring in the world.
I thought she just had a normal cold that was brought home by one of your children.
I mean, yes, that's probably the reality of the situation.
Oh,
But who
right.
goes by reality? Corey,
Aren't we supposed to be the ones that are going by reality?
yes, yes. Sorry, yes. Okay. So what's truly happening is Lauren has yet another virus that was probably brought home by a sniveling, snot dripping small child.
Mm,
Um, yeah, they're really good at doing that. And I think sometimes I'm at the point where I've just gotten all of their viruses that I
mhm.
probably am just slowly developed an immunity to under
Yeah.
fives disgustingness.
I think having children makes it possible to live longer. And I think that's the mechanism. You build a stronger immune system.
Somebody should have told the American Academy of Pediatrics that when they decided to tell parents to stop feeding all of their children peanuts and then creating a giant peanut allergy crisis.
Yeah. Did they ever face any liability
Nope.
for that?
Nope. And you know what also is crazy? It was based on one single weird paper that an immunologist didn't even write.
Let's give some backstory on this really quick because I think it's helpful because there's other AAP news this
There
week.
is. Okay.
So let's give a little bit of backstory. The American Association of Pediatrics,
No, the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Academy. Thank you. Sorry. The live fact checking, amazing. They represent most or many pediatricians, but I think their
60,
numbers are starting to fall
I
off.
think it's currently 67,000 pediatricians in the United States who pay a yearly fee to belong, yet they make a ton of their money um, from corporate sponsorships where they say things like this baby formula has the American Academy of Pediatrics seal of approval. And they have a lot of federal grants, which they lost a whole bunch of this week.
Right. So the baby formula, they put their seal on it when it's guaranteed not to include peanuts.
Corey, uh, you,
It's like kosher.
okay. So do you know, I don't, off the top of my head, I don't remember the exact years. But the peanut debacle was that a paper was written and they said, yep, we're going to stick our seal of approval on this. And it led to pediatricians across the United States beginning to tell parents, do not give your children peanuts. And what's really interesting about I find what's really interesting about this historical problem, culturally speaking, is that it is very much an American-based recommendation. So I say that because if you are a parent who lives in West Africa, first of all, they refer to peanuts as ground nuts, but
Mhm.
almost every single stew that the fufu sits in has a peanut, has ground nuts in it. It is a protein rich, nutrient dense, calorie dense source of food for a large number of people around the world. And it is also in a product, I believe it's called Bam Bam, which when there is famine or mass starvation, Bam Bam is this really easy to ship, doesn't need refrigeration, cheap as hell product that is used to fight starvation, and it's made of peanuts. So when the American Academy of Pediatrics put this out, one thing to note is that this would not have flown in a lot of other cultural places because peanuts have a high value in a
Mhm.
lot of other cultural cuisines. But they put this out, and the actual response was that it created life-threatening peanut allergies in a vast, large group of kids. Children died from this. Um, whole school districts went peanut free. Then,
Exacerbating the problem.
yes, exactly. So they created an allergy in a whole generation of kids, which killed some of them. And I only brought it up partially joking because about 2 weeks ago, I got a nasty gram from a teacher that was kind of, it's supposed to be like, Miss Reed, we are writing to remind you that we are a peanut-free school. And your 4-year-old was pissed off when he could not have his homemade peanut butter crackers that you sent as his daily snack. And he got really mad about it. Do never ever send peanuts again.
Oh, so they're continuing to exacerbate the harm.
Well, then my nasty gram reply was, y'all don't know what you're talking about. Are you not aware that the American Academy of Pediatrics has reverse course on this? And actually, the safer, better thing to do would be to have peanut butter smeared all over the walls of the school and let children eat this every day.
Yeah. Uh, I'm trying to remember a phrase that I learned this year, which is something like a bunch of old men around a table.
Oh,
You know what I'm talking about?
yes.
So the context for this was how, like, what are the different levels of um, trustworthiness or development maturity of any particular standard? And a very high level of standard is that you've done multiple uh, double blind tests and you've collected a lot of data and your standards are based on a very high level of confidence. And the lowest level for that standard is you bring a bunch of experts together, have them meet for however many days at a conference, and then they issue guidance, expert guidance, as a result of their meeting. And so it's not uninformed by any means, but the experts, when they give guidance like this, are playing some type of risk game, which is based on the information that we have. If we don't issue this guidance, more children will die. And what they're missing in this calculation is they did not account for how immunity gets developed in the population. They assumed that you are born with a peanut allergy, that you don't develop a peanut allergy by not eating peanuts. And so those experts missing a real critical piece of the puzzle issued guidance, and then a bunch of people who trusted the AAP. Why wouldn't you? You're you're meant to be able to trust your pediatrician. Uh, bring their babies in to get their shots, or they used to, and their pediatrician would say, "Hey, by the way, there's new guidance. don't feed your babies peanuts.
Trying to
And
yell at the dog to be quiet. It's not working.
well, that's fine. Just right at this second, my cats have decided to have a soccer match right outside of where we're recording. So I'm going to try to lure them back into the back rooms again.
Okay, so let's actually get into the news of the week. So I'm going to just read off a couple headlines, maybe, and then you can say what you're most interested in talking about further.
Yeah.
So we've got Marjorie Taylor Greene's bill that passed out of the House. Oh, don't shake your head at her. We have Dan Crenshaw's bill that also passed out of the House. The thing I think people should remember is that both of these are going to go to the Senate where they're going to die because the filibuster still lives on in the
Mm.
Senate. The Health and Human Services Agency announced some proposed regulatory actions that are going to affect hospitals who provide pediatric gender affirming care. We already touched on this. The American Academy of Pediatrics loses $18 million in federal grant funding for misaligning with the department's departmental priorities. Maybe the most important news, Nicki Minaj tweeted
Who's
about,
Nicki Minaj? Wait, what songs does she sing? Remind me.
okay, now I don't know. I can,
You don't know what Nicki Minaj? See, I think I know a couple of her songs. I don't really listen to music that was made after 1999, but I caught you off guard where you're like, "Oh yeah, Nicki Minaj." I'm like, "Oh yeah, who's she again?" Oh, let me Google it.
well, no, I just went to my Apple Music. Parent
No,
Super Bass Moment for Life. Starships. I don't know any of these Nicki
I don't know.
Minaj
I don't
songs.
know either. That's
Um,
if you know what the 6'7" meme is, maybe you can name some of her music, but I can't. I don't know what either of those things do.
oh, okay. Well, I know all about 6'7" because small children just will randomly
Oh,
blurt it
okay.
out and
All right.
everybody laughs.
All right.
Um, I think that the HHS policy is probably the issue that's going to stick around the longest into the future. It's going to have a period of public comments. I think that a few more hospitals are going to just go ahead and shut down their centers as this is coming down. Um, I think that there's going to be a number of lawsuits against it. Are you hopeful? Did you find this a positive?
I I have a lot of um, worries that the administration is doing things that are going to be reversible. And
Yeah.
one thing is true is if you destroy a lot of infrastructure for like you remove departments where these types of things are happening, you get all of these removed from the hospitals. It takes a lot longer to rebuild something than it does take to dismantle something.
So why would that be? That sounds like it. If if you don't want them to rebuild this, isn't this a positive that they're destroying some of the infrastructure around it?
It is, but for this to have long-term change attached to it, the more that we the more that society or the regime marginalizes a group, and this is the case that we're marginalizing is the clinicians, not the patients, the clinicians. The more solidarity they're going to have, they're going to circle their wagons and really have a lot of incentive to strategize to rebuild. And what I would rather do is try to persuade more of these providers that they're causing harm and that they should stop causing harm. And what I think is actually happening is that the level of polarization is ramping up so much that the next time that this ideology infects medicine, it's going to be a lot harder to stamp out. It's going to become a resistant virus. And I'm worried that the tactics that we're using, well, maybe for the next 5 or 10 years, we will say, "Hey, we won," and then 10 years from now, this is going to snap back again, even harder. So, if this is going to create breathing room, and by breathing room I mean create a period of time where it's much less likely that these kids are being harmed, then instead of packing up our signs and heading back, having a party, I think what we really need to do is figure out, like, we need to do some adversarial games where the smartest people that we know role play the positions of our adversaries and try to come up with the best ideas.
Okay, so I'll be Turban
Okay.
and you'll be um
Uh,
Leor Spear.
oh, wait, no, 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 no. Leor's not our adversary. I have to be one of our
Wait,
adversaries.
I thought we were role playing how
No,
we
no,
would
no.
talk to our adversaries.
No, so these types of games, what we would do is uh, put aside all of our identities for a while,
Okay.
and we would say, how do we overcome? We put ourselves into the positions, like you said, you'd be Turban, I would be someone else, who knows. Um, we lock ourselves into a room and we say, how do we defeat our enemies? How do we prevail? How do we overcome all of these draw setbacks that we've experienced? Because they're doing that. They have mailing lists where they're talking about, well, what can we do next? Um, whereas they have a veneer of saying, what do we have to do to protect our patients, right? They're not they're not going to be calculating necessarily how do we get rid of Jamie Reed. They're going to be thinking, how do we continue giving ongoing care to our affected
Well,
patients.
okay, so I hear what you're saying kind of theoretically, but I
Yeah,
think
these are like war games.
I actually, if that's really interesting. This is what I had just pulled up for those who are listening. I had just pulled up the 1983 classic War Games,
Yeah,
where the teen taps his computer, I think, accidentally into the NORAD missile defense system and thinks that he's playing a video game and he's
right.
actually like starting World War, whatever. Uh,
Yeah.
um, okay, so what HHS here, okay, I feel like these are the criticisms of what the administration has been doing.
It's not criticism of the administration. I'm thinking just one step above that, which is, how does this change the playing field in a way that provides incentive for our adversaries to band together and plan around it? I'm
Okay.
not criticizing the administration. I'm saying this, pardon me, we've moved a piece on the board. It has changed the board. We need to understand how that changes the board. And when I say we've moved a piece, I think it's, I don't know, maybe you deserve some credit because didn't you give some testimony this week?
Um, no, testimony. I don't
No.
know. My weeks blur.
Okay. Okay.
Let's go back to what the HHS proposal will do.
Yeah.
Okay,
Outline that.
let me break this down. So we have 27 states where there are bans on puberty blockers, cross-sex hormone surgeries. Okay. So this is not going to affect those 27 states. So this is going to be affecting 23 states. And in those 23 states, this is only going to affect a hospital. So what I think is interesting, just in practical terms, to think about is that something has shifted in medical care where 50 years ago, most of us would have had a private family physician.
Hmm.
They had a small practice where your go-to family physician or your go-to pediatrician might be in practice with two or three other providers. They
Yep.
work together. They own their own little business.
Yep.
Um, they have a receptionist. They have their own charting system.
It's like how most dentists continue to operate.
Yes, actually, yes, you're correct. Okay. So that's how this used to work. That's not how medicine works anymore. If I want to take my kid to their specialty doctor, especially a special is especially tied directly to a hospital. So I took a kid this week for physical therapy. It was in the hospital. So why is the dog having a problem today? Oh my God.
My cat just very, very carefully walked from all the way from the back of the house with his soccer ball in his mouth and dropped it right next to me and started batting it.
Okay, maybe we can cut out that little dog issue. So the what the HHS rule is going to do is in these 23 states, any hospital affiliated pediatric gender center, clinic, etc., is going to be put out of practice. And most of the big ones, at least in the state of Missouri, were hospital based. St. Louis had its gender center, Kansas City had its gender center. They were in a hospital setting and they were often multidisciplinary centers, which means as bad as the care was in the center where I worked, it was coming from a pediatric endocrinologist.
Mm.
There was a psychologist, a psychiatrist, attached. There was an adolescent medicine specialist. The HHS rule is going to shut down in those 23 states their hospital affiliated pediatric gender centers. That does not mean this stops.
No.
It means it's now going to be in the hands of family medicine doctors, rando pediatricians who are gonna see these kids and are gonna randomly just go, I guess, sure, I'll just prescribe you this thing.
Yeah. And to be fair, because I do want to point this out, that's already been going on in non-major cities throughout the entire country. So this wouldn't be a new development. It would be increasing the number of doctors who are doing this, but it wouldn't be new,
No, it wouldn't be new,
right?
but I think what it does is it's gonna shut down the bigger names.
Yeah, a lot of them have already been shut down. Who's left?
Well, Illinois. We've
Oh,
got
sure. Right, right.
Robert Garofalo, who's operating hospital affiliated, I think. I mean, Howard Brown, he's not at Howard Brown, but Robert Garofalo, Illinois, that is a hospital-based pediatric gender center.
Mm.
So his option, and Garofalo, if you've never seen one of the more famous videos, that's up on X, is he basically says, parents come to me all the time and ask me, how do I know for sure that my kid is trans? And he goes, you look at the kid and you say, hey, are you trans? And if the kid says, yes, I'm trans, then your kid is trans. Like he, that's how he's kind of operating. Um,
And then they bill your insurance $2,000 for that test.
yeah. Um, I mean, his practice will be, quote, put out of business. The hospital will have to change, will have to close because what HHS is doing is using a giant fiscal stick and hitting all of these hospitals with not, we won't reimburse you for the gender care. We won't give you Medicaid, Medicare, CHIP, TRICARE dollars at all, period. And then
Right,
it would just close the hospital. No hospital is going to close over this.
right.
Yeah.
No hospital is going to find independent funding unless maybe,
Oh, not to operate their entire budget. No.
yeah. Well, their whole budget doesn't come from the federal government, right?
No, but it's enough of the bottom line. They're not gonna. These centers are gonna close, and this is gonna pivot back or pivot into, more private, smaller docs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, I still think overall it's going to dramatically reduce the number of kids being medicalized.
Yes,
I mean, so it's a positive.
immediately. Yes.
But what do you think? How do you think what's what is your criticism? I mean, I know my criticism is I don't think it goes far enough, but I just still think there needs to be a federal ban. Um, which was
Yeah.
what, yeah, but
Well, yeah, a law is going to be a lot more binding than an administrative
policy.
rule. Right.
But do you really think in at the end of this administration, if AOC becomes president, um, if, if AOC or Newsom becomes president, these hospitals are going to rebuild these centers?
Yeah, some will.
Okay. You think
Absolutely.
do you think WPATH will still be in existence by then?
Definitely.
Oh, come on, give me a I went into today being like, "Yay, it's Christmas. Look what we won yesterday." And now you're like, "You didn't win shit."
This is this is a long-term. You've won battles, Jamie. You've won battles. The war is going to continue.
The federal government has done something though.
Yes, there's a battle won.
Okay, so are you the war? Can you tell me your war strategy? What's the
I'm going to repeat on the podcast something that I told you earlier this week, and I talked to somebody completely differently on a completely different topic, and I brought up the same idea here. In strategy, after you have made an action, after you have changed something, you've changed the game somehow. You're you have changed the environment in a way that you have to go back and evaluate the environment again. You have to
Yes, you
go
did.
back, make observations,
Yes, you did say this.
and then figure out where have all the pieces moved to. And then after that, you can start another round of analysis. Like we've been doing this the whole time up to this point when we were um, in a more defensive mindset, right? Like
When do you think it pivoted from defense to offense? Do you think we're on offense?
we are maybe, I think I misspoke. When we were attacking, right? We were attacking the entrenched interests. Now
Okay.
we're defending. So that's the real flip.
Ah, okay. Okay.
That's the real flip.
Okay.
So when you're attacking, you have a lot of you get to be a lot more selective about where you're going. Are we going to do an action against the AAP? Are we going to show up here? Are we going to try to infiltrate this conference? Right? When you're attacking, you've got so many different options. When you're defending, you have to basically defend everything. You don't know where the attack is going to come from. You are defending everything.
Okay. I have not done this shift in my mindset yet. You're correct.
Well, that's because this isn't binary. This is non-binary, where we've made some federal progress. We've made progress in several states. There's still providers who have their licenses out there who are still giving testosterone to teenage girls. Even in Indiana, I know this for a fact. Um, that's there's fewer of them. But now we have to make a decision. Was our goal initially to reduce this 100% or 90% or 80%? And if our goal, I don't think it's realistic for us to say it's 100% because uh, that's virtually impossible. If our goal was to reduce this 90%, uh, did we succeed in that? And if so, how do we keep those gains? And if we've only hit 50%, even after everything that's changed, where are the gaps, right? We have caused so much change to happen. The people who were working in these clinics have had to, some of them have moved all the way to different states, right?
Yeah,
Families have moved to different
they have.
states.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that are in flux right now. We have to see where things start to stabilize and then draw up our next strategy. Do the analysis of the new state, then figure out what actions we need to follow up with.
Okay, so
And some of them are defensive.
I'm, I, the longer that I'm out of being in a center,
Yeah.
I do feel like it's harder and harder to really get a understanding about what's going on in these places.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I first left, I feel like I had this good, I had a good grasp and understanding. And now that it's 2.5 years out, it's like, I don't even, what are these clinicians, how are they even thinking anymore? Are they thinking that they're under siege and that they're on the rights? Like, do any of them question?
Mm-hmm.
I just I don't know how they think anymore. And I also really don't know how a lot of these parents are thinking.
Of the ones that are affirming.
Yeah, because there was so much in like 2019, 2020, 21, 22. So many of these parents, they really were trusting.
Mm-hmm.
They were like, I don't really know what's going on. This is what my kid is claiming. You're the experts. Tell me what to do. I just can't imagine that are just general parents like, oh, my kid is claiming that they're trans today. Are they still like so naive that they're just like, oh, you're the experts. Tell me what to do?
How many of the parents that you talk to would you say, I'm trying to set this up correctly. If your child had a bronchitis and you brought them to the doctor, then you know that you're taking your kid for a medical issue. If your kid had severe depression and you were taking them to the psychologist, you would know that they had that they had a actual mental issue. How many parents that you saw were bringing their kids to the clinic with that pathological mindset?
That they knew from baseline, that they thought from baseline that their child had a true condition.
Right, that needed to be treated.
I think that your framing of the question,
You see,
there were
do you want me to
no,
like
I
explain
well,
where I'm going?
no, there were a lot of parents who believed that if their child did have a real condition, the doctors could say yes or no. And there were a number of parents who thought, oh, my kid's not really trans. This just popped up. I don't believe this for a minute. I'm just going to take them to the specialist, and the specialist is going to see right away this is not true, and they're just going
Right,
to send it to them.
right. Okay, so you're saying when the parents needed support with, I need to know whether I need to take this seriously or not.
Yeah.
That's the support they were looking for.
Yes. And they
Okay.
thought that there was some real evaluation that would occur. that would then provide this isn't real.
Right.
But those parents still did believe that there was a real concept of a real trans kid. They just didn't think their kid was it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did I answer it?
You did. Um, so when your question, which is semi-rhetorical, you said, I don't know what these parents are thinking anymore. Those are the parents that you're wondering about. Because what I was thinking about are the parents who were affirming and were so excited to have a trans kid.
It's not the bulk of them.
Yeah.
It was never the it was never the majority of the parents coming to the gender centers.
Okay. So the
The
parents who are
majority of
blindsided.
the majority of the parents coming had a child in real distress,
Mhm.
and they really thought these people will do a real evaluation and really help my kid.
Well, we know the evaluation now is, hey, are you trans? Oh, you are? Okay, yeah.
But I mean, I knew that I knew there was no real evaluation pretty quickly.
And you couldn't say so to the parents, of course.
Um, in the at a certain point, okay, so part of my job was I was the intake coordinator. The parents would call, they'd talk to the medical secretaries. The medical secretaries would get their insurance, set up a chart, whatever. They'd send me this patient, and I had created this about, I mean, it could take about an hour of an assessment tool. And one of it was an open-ended conversation with the parent. And at a certain point, yeah, I mean, at a certain point, the parents who were the most skeptical saying like, I don't think this is true. There's no way my kid's actually trans. I'm going to bring them in, you're going to assess them, and you're going to tell them, no, you're not trans.
Mm.
At a certain point, I was kind of saying like, no, that's not really what's going to happen. Like, I was, I mean, I think I was saying it kind of still in the social worky kind of, this is really, but I feel like I was trying to sort of like warn some of these parents. If what you're looking for is that, that's not what you're going to get.
Right.
And then it was always their decision, or do you want to come in? Do you not want to come in? Yeah.
Well, I can very much appreciate when the decision seems overwhelming that you look for an expert for support.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but the parents just were never getting that. And then I think about so many of the parents that we know who tried to take their kid to one of these places and immediately caught on right away, like, oh, you're just that. I feel like the parents who picked up on this is just a racket. Um, yeah, I really feel for those parents still. But these hospital centers closing, um, I think the families that believe this is the still the right thing to do are going to find ways to keep their kids on these meds, um, these drugs. They're still going to find the ways. But there's going to be a number of families who were kind of just going along who this is going to stop some of those kids.
Should we, I'm just looking at the clock here. Should we talk about the Marjorie Taylor Greene's bill a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Did you watch the hearing?
No, I did not.
There was Um, through all of the hearings, there would be somebody holding up these giant graphic photos. Um, and because I didn't know what time or when Marjorie Taylor Greene's bill was going to come up, I was watching basically the whole day. And before they got to her bill, they were talking about the drug traffickers in the boats of Venezuela being blown up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the big giant graphic pictures were also present then of like giant picture of drug cartel guy blown to pieces. Like it seems to be an overarching theme. I don't think it's just a Marjorie Taylor Greene thing to just hold up giant graphic pictures. I saw a lot before that as well.
Yeah. I think if you're going to start a small business, a good option would be to do a poster print shop in downtown Washington, D.C.
I think they have enough of those.
I bet they got a lot of business.
We will print all of your blood and gore that you need
Yeah.
at the last minute.
What would be
So her
good
bill,
is
her bill
you could do
passed.
those ones that change the picture when you look at it. So like blowing up the drug
Oh
bill.
no, no. The sequin ones where if you do this and you rub the sequins down, it's one picture, and if you rub it back up the other way, it's another picture. That's what I want to make.
I have an idea. Why don't we get out of this activism racket, which is not even covering the bills, and just open up a print shop?
I would much rather just make banana bread for the rest of my life.
I don't blame you.
I want to host Airbnbs and make banana bread. Okay, so her bill passed,
Yes,
but it's going to go die over in the Senate.
it passed with bipartisan support,
It
and
did.
I want to read a little bit from the bill.
Okay.
And I have to admit to you that I I did not even know that this was hitting the floor this week until it happened. I did not know about the bill. This is all happening. Uh,
He's been working this bill for years.
I
Crenshaw's bill too.
I just I didn't think that she had any pull to get this heard because she's sort of a clown and she's on the outs with Donald Trump. So I thought that she would just had no ability to even get this to the floor anymore, but I was wrong. Um, so the short title is the Protect Children's Innocence Act,
Mhm.
and uh, it concerns the genital and bodily mutilation of a minor and chemical castration of a minor. So I'm just going to read the main part here.
Okay.
So this is genital or bodily mutilation, um, except as provided in subsection G, whoever in any circumstance described in subsection D knowingly performs or attempts to perform genital or bodily mutilation on another person who is a minor shall be fined under this title, imprisoned not more than 10 years, or both. So that is the main meat of this. And then there's a bunch of definitions and clarifications that you can go look at if you so choose. But that's the main thing. And this is for crossing state lines to do these things. So if you take your kid from one state to another, this is international or interstate trafficking.
Yes. Do
I think
you
that's correct. I think I have
do
that
you
correct.
think that's a good bill or a bad bill?
Well, there's some ambiguity that the opponents of this bill are using to try to fairly or unfairly develop opposition to it, which is that the the language here where it attempts to perform makes it sound like parents who are bringing their kids to the doctor that could construe an attempt. If the idea is I'm going to take my 14-year-old from Texas to I don't know Illinois, fly my 14-year-old from Texas to Illinois, boom, there now you have an attempt to perform this surgery.
Isn't the point of this bill to basically it would just close it all down?
Well, the intent is different from the action. So
Correct.
whatever the intent is, how you realize that intent matters quite a lot. And what this looks like it would do is open up a lot of different types of people to federal prosecution for performing or attempting to perform the operations on minors that you and I oppose. So there's some discretion probably on the part of the prosecutors, and you would have to decide, do I trust this administration or the next administration enough to target the people who I think really deserve it? Or is this the sort of administration who would go after everyone just to make a point?
I hear your criticisms.
It's just analysis right now.
Well, okay, but I know at a state level, um, oftentimes once there's a criminalization element in the bill, we lose some of the Republican support. Some of the squishy Republicans will back away when there's a criminalization element. Um, I think this is one of those situations where if we got to draft the bill, I don't think it would have. I personally would not criminalize any of the parents. I would put that onus on the doctors and the health systems, and even criminalization would potentially not be the first go. I think you should lose your license, and your license ability to practice medicine would be the punishment that I would have sought. That would be my take on it. Now,
But
if
since this is what's on offer, you're like, well, this isn't perfect, but
um, I think what it is it sends a pretty strong message, but if the if the Senate were serious, couldn't they take her bill that came over from the House, remove the criminalization, rework it to just have the removal of licensure, pass it, and then send it back in for
yeah,
reconciliation? So they have to merge the two together.
I don't think that they can do anything about licensure. That's a state matter. But they could probably amend and remove the attempts to perform and make it only a performance. But that removes some of the protection.
I think if we go back to your thought in the middle about strategy and where we're at and looking at the landscape, I think even when you just mention licensure is a state level problem, I think what this continues to churn is that our system of government um, is imperfect in its perfection, which means it really has had there's so many layers of check over here, balance over here, that
Mhm.
when you're faced with a crisis like this, there there is no simple solution.
Yes, that's on purpose. Simple solutions tend to be devastating.
They
You know what? I have a simple solution for you.
okay.
Ban peanut butter.
No, will
Simple solution.
you? Corey,
What?
you, why is it that most of the time when I'm done talking with you, I'm left with this weird feeling in my gut like nothing got resolved, but yet I'm going to be stuck thinking about 10 things that Corey said for the rest of the day.
I want to feel like in the long run, we have set all of the conditions to have a sustainable win, a sustainable win, something that goes past us.
Okay, but that sustainable win in part goes back to the regulatory bodies themselves. What everybody who is
Yes.
opposed to, everybody who says, I'm opposed to bans, I'm opposed to laws, why couldn't, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological, like they should have regulated this. They should have figured this out on their own. I mean, I
Mhm.
think you're going back to the regulatory bodies of what is medicine is still broken.
Yes.
Yeah.
It depends on your definition of broken. From my perspective, a lot of these institutions exist to protect the doctors and not the patients. And frequently they're very good at that, maybe better than we give them credit for.
Okay.
How many, how many, how many patients organizations exist that are comparable to the scale of any of the professional organizations?
They're broken up into specialty. They're broken up into disease specialties.
The professional groups, you mean?
No, I mean, are you asked about patient
Yeah,
groups?
what patient groups have anywhere close to the same amount of institutional sway as any of the professional groups?
They don't. The groups that pop up are around disease states. So you'll see a group pop up that's about my child
Right.
has this rare type of cancer. And oftentimes those are groups that are merely advocating to the doctors to do more, not less. Um, I mean, gender medicine slid into these cracks in all of these systems, even in clinical research. The one of the major cracks in clinical research that let this slide in is the doctor, the person who is asking the research. If they say, I'm not asking a research question, I'm just treating, they get out of all of the rules and regulations about research. I'm not asking a research question.
Yeah.
I'm just treating.
Smart. Smart.
It gets them out. So um I think you leave us with a fundamental question that we're going to have to continue to grapple with. Which is, um, I think A, do we think we are moving towards a win? Is it a sustainable win? Is it a win that's going to last 20 years out, or is this a 4-year win? Those are the questions. But then the other question becomes, if it's not gender, how do we keep another thing like this from popping up again?
Oh, I don't care about that.
Okay. Well, I care about that
Yeah, yeah.
because I do think this is tied into a long history, especially in psychology and psychiatric fields where crazy batshit things pop up and then they destroy a whole bunch of lives and then they dissipate again.
I think that that's built into the human psyche and that all we can do is be vigilant. I don't think we can get rid of that.
Okay, so we have to go over to an interview in a few minutes that I'm kind of nervous about.
All right. Well, it's going to be awesome.
Oh, great. I'm so glad you're feeling confident in it. Um, I'm glad that your cat made some appearances today.
Yes.
And let's move on to the next segment.
Great.
All right.
Oh,
Bye, Corey.
happy holidays to our audience and to the production staff that makes this possible every week.
You love thanking them.
I do. I have a lot of gratitude.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for the people who drop comments under
Oh, I do
uh,
too. I read them all.
our YouTube, our Substack.
Yeah.
So happy
Good stuff.
holidays, everybody, and have a happy new year.
Thanks, Corey. I'll see you soon.
Bye. Welcome back to the second segment of this week's holiday special Informed Dissent. Today we have with us our guest, Dr. Laura T., a gastroenterologist and clinician researcher. Can I read all of this? Is this allowed?
Are you
Yeah,
allowed to read it?
yeah,
Well, I am. I'm want to be sensitive because reveals more of your background.
I
You're
see.
okay with that?
If you want to leave locations out of it, I'm fine with you're going to edit, obviously. I'm fine with you
Yeah.
saying I'm Canadian. I'm fine with you saying I'm the division director of a Canadian university. I suspect people who are highly motivated who want to track me down are going to find a way to do it.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
but I don't need to make it easy for people. Um,
Sure.
but yeah, like I said, I think the main things is my family has different last names, and I practice under my original name, uh, but my kids enjoy the privacy of having our family being under a different last name, and
Yep.
those are the kind of things that I'm more concerned about, just because they are,
I
yeah,
totally understand. That makes sense. And what I will say is that you and I are both individuals of trans experience.
that is true.
And you you and I have interacted a little bit before online. And how I would describe you is you are able to hear some of the arguments that people like me bring up,
Yeah,
process them, and say, here's what I agree with, here's what I disagree with, and this is my feedback about your position. Which normally, when we use a term like a trans activist,
yeah.
the trans activists normally don't do stuff like this. So you are more of a
I'm an
um,
emotionally regulated trans activist.
so you are that person. You are the one.
I strive to be. I'm not
Um,
saying I'm the one, but I strive to be. It doesn't mean I always hit my marks either, because we're all human, and sometimes we get a little hot under the collar. But part of being in my profession is, we're told a lot of things that there's a lot of expressed emotion that comes across when you're in the medical field. You're often breaking bad news to people. You're catching people by surprise. People bring a lot of their own history to the table. They bring a lot of their own assumptions about who you are and what you stand for. And so it's not unusual for us to be on the receiving end of expressed emotion. And one of the things that I think good physicians learn early is how not to take that personally, and how to sort of focus on what is important and try to understand where the patient is coming from. And rather than sort of adding to the emotion of it, of trying to deflect it and understand it and showing empathy. And I try to bring the same thing to the table when I'm into discussions. I have to admit, I don't always get the same courtesy back, but
mhm.
like I said, I can't control other people's emotional responses. All I can control is my own. And I think in the long run, if I can maintain that sort of positioning and some of that, sort of sure-footedness and steadfastness, that I think it adds to my credibility when I'm trying to make my points to the people that
Yeah.
matter.
Makes sense. So one of the things that we wanted to do today is talk
Sure.
about areas where you believe that you can show a different perspective to our normal audience, informed dissent listeners, and to us, to me and Jamie and Lauren maybe as well.
Sure.
What are some of the things that you would like to persuade us to think about differently?
So, there's a few things, and I don't want to sort of get into some long discursive list.
Mhm.
But sort of my main position is that I think when a lot of people think about trans people, or, or people under the T umbrella, whatever that may be, they sort of paint them broadly with the same brush. And when people hear, I'm going to be hearing from a trans person, they bring a lot of assumptions to the table. And
Mhm.
that includes also ascribing a lot of motivations for why trans people behave the way they do, or why they think the way they think. And what I try to first of all say is that, you know, um, you know, we all really should be judged on as individuals. As you say, we're people of trans experience, but we come from different experiences. We have different outlooks. We have different beliefs. We have different perspectives on the place of trans people in society. Um, the reasons why we chose this path are often very different, or why we followed this path, I should say, are often very different. And I think when you say someone's trans, a lot of people jump to, well, we know trans people as a group do this, or we believe trans people as a group, let's say, have higher levels of criminality, or are motivated, have sexual motivations, or are more likely to be disrespectful of the experience of natal females.
Yeah. Do you think all those things, by the way?
Do I think all those? Do I personally think those things?
Yeah.
What things particularly?
I mean, not for everybody. Would you say that those stereotypes hold water?
Like I think like any stereotypes, the reason that stereotypes are pervasive is that there are a significant number of people, whether it's by numbers, by proportion, or by their vocalness, that tend to stand out as avatars for that for that class. And then people, because those people tend to have a platform, or you see different examples of those, people tend to stereotype. And this isn't true to only of trans
Mhm.
people. It's true of any sort of identifiable group, whether you're talking about white middle-aged women, whether you're talking about people of different races or different ethnicities, whether you're talking about people of different religious backgrounds, of different educational
Right.
backgrounds. People often will make assumptions. Well, you're from this part of the country, and you're from the South, and therefore you believe this. Or you live out in the country, and therefore you believe this. Or you're Jewish, or therefore you believe this. And I think the same thing can apply to, and I think a lot of the same things can apply to trans people.
Right.
I obviously, the other thing I try to bring is I often describe myself, at least in terms of my transpositionality, as a binary assimilationist, meaning that my motivations when I transitioned and what I try to ascribe to is that I did not do this because I wanted to stand apart as a third sex or as someone who wanted to stand apart from society. My goal, my aspirations, both prior to my transition, during my transition, and now how I live my life, is to
Mhm.
embrace
Yeah.
the thing that I really wanted to be, which is to be broadly perceived as being female in the world, uh, both to myself. So when what I reflect back to myself, but what I reflect back to other people. And by assimilation, it means not to stand apart from society, but to be a part of society and to
Right.
contribute to society as any other member aspires to. Not to sort of stand as someone of trans experience, but to have my own skill set and contribute to the Commonwealth. Yes, I acknowledge
Yeah.
that I have a different upbringing. I acknowledge that I took a different path to get here.
Right.
But my goal is to contribute to society in a positive way.
Yep. And that used to be sort of the norm, and it's let's say that that's fallen into maybe a bit of a more of a minority position now. But
Yeah.
one of the things that I really, because I know our audience, I know Jamie is looking forward to this particularly. What are some of the views that we have that you would like us to reevaluate or challenge? Like, what would you bring to us?
So, like as far as changing like your mind in particular or Janie's mind in particular, it's not terribly critical to me. Like, of course, I recognize you both have a platform that's well earned. I've listened to your podcast. It's informative, and I can understand why you have an audience. Um, the in terms of where I think you're bringing what you bring to the table is I would like you to recognize that we are multitudes. And I think there's a lot of assumptions that are made, like, so the show I listened to as an example was one from a couple weeks ago. The theme of that show was when you were discussing, I think her name is Jennifer Capasso. She was the lady with stage 4 metastatic colon
Oh,
cancer.
yeah.
Right, right,
Yeah, the
Who,
surgery case. Yes.
yeah, and I don't need to recapitulate all
Yeah.
the details. One of the things is I don't know Jennifer's whole story and what her motivations are, but um, I do think that uh, there can often be made assumptions about what people are and what they stand for. And so I know, as an example, you would refer to me as a trans-identified male. If you were speaking about me, and I'm sure you have your principles for doing this, and why you would refer to me with male pronouns. Now, when I'm out in the world, it's very rare that I'm going to encounter a male pronoun. And I recognize a little that's the work I've put in, and a little bit of luck, and a little bit, and having the resources to do what I do. Um, the I recognize also I am biologically, or I don't like to use the term biologically, but I am chromosomally male. I am, the gametes I made when I was capable of making gametes were the small ones. I recognize that has a lot of influence in terms of how I see the world. I spent 27 years in that body and socialized in that role. Um, that having been said, I do find that, especially in the health context, that there is a value to respecting people's sense of self. Um, and one can hold the two views that I understand that this person is biologically or natally male or chromosomally male, and that
Mhm.
is important information, while still recognizing that there is value in using the pronoun that someone respects because you respect that person. When I hear someone using a male pronoun, particularly when they don't know much about them, what it implies to me is sort of a baseline of contempt for people with
Mhm.
trans experience that you're coming to the table with. That I'm assuming that you're coming in, that if you're trans, you're automatically bringing some amount of bad faith assumptions, and that you're somehow worthy of a little less respect just on the basis of being trans, regardless of what your points of view actually might be. Um,
Mhm.
I was reading, I believe it was in Reality's Last Stand. This is Colin Wright's Substack. And, he had invited on a number of people from different perspectives about the use of pronouns. And of course, there was a variety of different perspectives about pronouns. And I tended to agree more with Collins, which was that he tends to use the pronouns people prefer as as a signature, as a sign of respect.
Mhm.
That and it's not that he's holding two truths. He recognizes that person's background. He understands that person recognizes their background and the influence that it has on their perspective. But that when you refer to someone in the terms they wish to be referred to, it implies mutual respect. And
Mhm.
that I recognize I don't want to compel speech. In the end, you can decide to do what you want to do. But when people do that to me, it signals, especially if they don't know anything about me, it signifies both a contempt for the class of individual and lack of respect for me as an individual. And I think it closes a lot of doors, and especially when we're trying to have these conversations across the aisle, where we're trying to bridge differences and understand where we're coming from different places. It can put someone on their back feet when that's not necessarily the place that you want to start from. And that's sort of,
Okay.
so I think in the end, that's unhelpful. If your goal is just, I want to demonize all trans people in all circumstances, all times, carry on.
Yeah.
The
So,
fact that you
so
have this,
let me see if I understand this correctly, and I want to hear Jamie's
of course,
reaction if I have this correctly. One of the things you'd like to persuade us of is to um, have a little bit more nuance in the way that we apply the pronouns, sexed pronouns, to subjects that we're discussing, whether or not they're present. Do I hear
well,
that correctly?
I think there's two things. Like first of all, pronouns are always optional.
Okay.
You can, yeah, if you want to refer, like, the reason I pick on, not pick on, but I sort of use the example of Jennifer is you
Yeah,
can,
it's a good example.
yeah, you can call that person Jennifer. You can refer to her as the patient, the cancer patient. And
Mhm.
so when you make a specific choice of using male pronouns, or recognized pronouns have a value as language because they are shortcuts. Um, but it signals contempt for a person who I don't think necessarily did anything wrong. Uh, what you can pick on certain parts of her story in terms of should she have had the recorder on or all those kind of things. But just in terms of
Okay.
that person as an individual, it's easy to say Jennifer. It's easy to say the patient Capasso, and you can just
All
say
right.
like I don't want. But when you use a male pronoun for someone who is clearly making an effort, and I recognize like we may have different looks and degree of passability when looking at the photo that they used. You might come to different judgments, but
Right.
what I see there is a person who's making an effort,
Okay.
and I don't necessarily see this person. And if and you can decide if this person, let's say, has a long history of sort of making assumptions about your points of view, making assumptions about people who are
Right.
gender critical. You can make that choice, and as an example, we talk about.
I want to give Jamie a chance to weigh
I,
in here
I
because
talk a
I
lot.
don't think she's had added anything yet. So what's your reaction, Jamie?
First of all, Laura, I'm so glad that you were willing or wanted to come on and join us. I will say the way that we first began to interact was on X, on Twitter.
Mhm.
And one of the things I always appreciated in those interactions was that you and I were able to have conversations that I felt were more medically inclined. We would have some pretty good debates on some of the medical evidence and things like that. And I find those really good, challenging. I like those kind of interactions on those
Well,
social
thank
media
you.
platforms. So,
Yeah,
um,
they're rare now.
yes.
Yeah,
Um, in terms of kind of this first topic at hand around pronouns. Um, First, my own thinking has changed, or my own practice has changed quite a lot. Um, if I think back to the very first night after the Free Press story, at that time, my former spouse was still trans-identified, was using male pronouns, was something that I was still utilizing. For me personally, I can hear the angle of that kind of level of seeking out. I think you might have used the term kind of respect or the recognition of the individual. I think it's challenging for me because I view this more on a policy level, where if we look at the patient Jennifer from the surgical discussion,
yeah.
my overarching policy advocacy position is that I don't care what someone's name is. If you want to legally change your name, you legally, you can legally change your name as an adult to whatever, and I will use whatever a legal name is. But as a policy position, I don't support the concept that anyone can legally change their sex, and therefore the recognition of an alternative pronoun would, to me, is almost, I would hope it would get to a point policy wise where it's almost irrelevant because there would be no legal pathway for sex recognition, like of a sex change recognition. And so I feel like part of this conversation is that in this interim moment where we have individuals who have been through a process, that now I wonder, as a society, as a policy position, if that process should still have a legal position to stand.
So I'm hearing that. I just want to make sure you're finished before I
Yeah.
respond. Or if Corey want to add anything.
No, please, please.
Yeah. So I'm going to separate that into two parts. So the first is the legal, and the second is the medical context, because I don't think those necessarily are contingent on one another. Um, I'm going to start with the medical context, which is um, one, um, first of all, how I refer to a patient. I don't ask to see their license. I don't ask to see their passport or their birth certificate or their health card or whatever it is. I refer to people how they wish to be referred to. And
Mhm.
it doesn't matter to me whether I see that person, like obviously I'm going to make some not judgments, but I'm going to make some assessments based on what's physically in front of me and based on what's in the medical record. But in general, I'm going to extend my patients, like I do all my patients, some baseline degree of respect, because one of the things I recognize is that when patients perceive they are in a disrespectful environment, it makes them less likely to seek appropriate care. It makes them less trustworthy of the medical system and how they are going to be engaged with in different interactions. And there's fairly solid evidence that when people, and this isn't just around trans issues, that when people feel they're entering a healthcare institution where the healthcare institution does not, where they don't, where there's a lot of distrust, and this has been seen, for instance, in a lot of in Black and Hispanic populations in the States. It's been seen in other parts, in the GLB community, is that people who feel that they are not going to be given a fair shake in interactions with the healthcare with in the healthcare environment will often choose not to interact with healthcare environments, which means that when they're having symptoms or when they have healthcare needs, they may be late in getting those addressed.
Can I
And
ask, just
yeah,
sorry, can I just
go ahead.
ask a clarifying question though? I, I personally am not talking about race or family structure or, when I worked in a medical system, I was actually that was at what you're saying about all of those other groups is actually hugely important to me. So I'm an adoptive parent of children who do not match my race.
Okay.
Um, I'm a lesbian. I know that, when I would walk into a patient's room, um, to this day, if I still worked in a hospital, I'm going to use the name in the chart, but I also would walk in and always want the room to help me establish what are the relationships here. Never assume this is mom. This could be grandma. You're like all of those things. I I worry that we're adding in all of these other elements when there's an assumption that those other elements of respect somehow disappear because I'm questioning the biological sex.
Yeah.
So,
So I don't think those have to come at the expense of one another. So I can
well, I
respect.
don't know how they're tied. How are
Okay,
they tied?
I'll explain.
Okay.
So for instance, I see, even though I'm not someone who provides gender affirming care, um, I see just by the context of my work, I do see a lot of people who are gender diverse, let's say. Some of them will have their their natal signifiers on their health cards. Some of them will have changed it. Um, that doesn't always bear the same relation to how they present themselves and how they want to be addressed. What I try to demonstrate to people who come in here, and I'm just going to talk about people who are gender diverse, is that I am someone you can trust with your health. And I am
Mhm.
someone who is a trustworthy person who you might feel comfortable disclosing parts of your medical history to me, because I'm not going to be someone who is going to, where you're going to think I'm going to judge you by the nature of your background. Now, that doesn't mean that I forget or I ignore the biologic realities that come along with having a natal sex. And now, does that necessarily need to be reflected on forward-facing ID? Does that mean I have to
Yeah.
refer to a person, let's say, who is natally male, but is presenting as female, as he, him? It doesn't. Does it mean that I'm still going to recognize that because that person is natally male, that they might have, that's going to have different impacts on their health than someone who wasn't born natally male or who is a natal female? Of course I am, because I'm a physician. I recognize those things are important. Does that need to be plastered across that person's chart? No. I mean, like, does it have to be on their armband so that every food service personnel and every porter needs to know this person's history? And of course, this is going to be different depending on someone who, let's say, is early transition, where their natal sex is going to be more obvious, or just as an example, someone like myself, where it's going to be less obvious. So, like, so for instance, I'll bring this to me, even though I'm not going to talk specifically about my health, but I've obviously have all my documents changed. They've been changed for a long time. When I come to a hospital, I don't want to have someone assuming, oh, there's an M on your chart, and making assumptions about my trans history, because that may have nothing to do with why I'm there today. I will disclose my trans history where it's relevant. And I have no problem with my trans history being part of my medical record in as a protected piece of medical information, just like any other piece of medical information. For instance, if I had hypertension, that would be a part of my medical history that would be important to be on the chart. I may not want everybody to know about it. I don't personally have a history of alcohol or drug abuse, but if I had a history of alcohol and drug abuse, I wouldn't want every person in the hospital knowing it. But I'm perfectly fine with that being part of my medical chart, because it's highly relevant. But it's also highly relevant that I'm living as a perceived female, because that also has medical implications as well. So I think there are ways to handle this without necessarily disrespecting the patient by referring to them as a man, or by referring to that person with male pronouns if they are presenting as female.
So let me bring this back to the context that we started with, which is how we refer to people when we're discussing these issues
Yeah.
on the podcast. Because it makes sense to have a different rule applied when you're operating in a professional setting, especially as a doctor with the patient. You want us to reconsider changing how we refer to people, even when we're discussing them when
Well,
they're
like I
absent.
said, you have a show, you have your
Mm,
own points of views, and you have an agenda, and I don't want to dictate your agenda to you. So if your agenda is better served by referring to me as a man, then carry on. Um, if part of your agenda
yeah.
involves reaching out to reasonable members of the trans community and trying to build bridges, I don't know if that's the most effective way to do it. Now,
Mm,
that might not be your top priority. That may You may have other priorities that may supersede that. Whatever you decide in the end is your own business.
mm.
I'm not good.
What
Yeah, I'm
does
not.
building, what does that bridge and reaching out look like though, if at the end the policy um that I would advocate for, do you ever
So, Jamie, is the policy you advocate for today the policy you would have advocated for a year ago?
a year ago, yes. 2 years ago, no.
Okay, so it's changed.
It has
And
changed.
it's changed because you've had conversations and you've given thought and you've given sober thought about why you've gotten to where you've gotten to.
I think I believe that my policy has changed, not necessarily that I've had conversations, but more based on what I've seen in terms of evidence, um, medical evidence, systematic review evidence. Um, but from a policy perspective, do you believe that what you would refer to as a reasonable trans-identified person, do you think that it matters at the end of the day if the pronouns that I use are sex-based or by identity-based? If at the end of the day, the policy that I would push for is that there would be no more medical, legal, or socially supported transition
Yeah.
for
So
any age.
so my response to that is that your policy preferences have changed over time. And if I were an effective advocate of my position, my hope is that your policy positions would change again. So the 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 so the reason I'm advocating for these things is I think there is value to it, and I think we build a better society if your policy preferences don't come to pass. And I'm not saying the original policy preferences, the ones we have existence, are optimal, because I would change those as well. But I think if I convince you or convince others that there is a value to respecting trans people who are putting in time and effort to contribute to society and not to put barriers in the way of people like me or of people who have the potential of becoming people like me, that we build a better society. And so my hope, and I'm not saying this is something I'm going to, have you coming over to me by the end of this conversation, but my hope is for me to be making the case about why we should be more nuanced about things like uh, the ability to be de facto recognized as a member of the opposite sex, despite not being born as one. Um,
Mm.
do I I recognize we live in a self ID world in a lot of places. If we're talking about changing policy preferences, that was a policy that I once wholeheartedly embraced. It's one that I no longer do. And it's because I too have been thoughtful about it and what the implications what the implications of having self ID policy are, both for trans people and for non trans identified people. And I don't think it's good policy right now. Does that mean I need to replace it with the opposite? No. I think there is a more nuanced position that can be reached. Uh,
Mm.
but it involves people like you and I listening to each other.
Do you
So,
believe,
well,
go ahead, Corey.
yeah, I think we've covered the pronoun thing pretty well, and I appreciate you articulating your position, and it was a good discussion. I wonder if beyond pronouns, what it would be another um, thing that we advocate for or believe that you think that deserves some reconsideration or another perspective.
Huh. Should have kept a list.
Yeah.
So, trying to think which one I want to go. So, we, I know we talked about pronouns, but we were sort of leading into the second one, which is about legal recognition.
Legal
Uh,
recognition. Okay, great.
okay, so
So just to preface that before you say that, to
or
clarify, and
maybe
Jamie, if
more
you
important,
disagree,
maybe more
what's that?
important, like obviously you know my background. Are
Right.
we could have a talk about anything. Are there things that you particularly wanted to make sure that your listeners had a chance to hear from me, given my perspective? I don't know when I'm going to be on
Yeah.
again.
No,
We're going to be on again, but are there
sure.
things that you wanted to really, as opposed to having a broad
No,
views about all things?
this is a great
Yeah,
topic. So I just want to lay the ground of. I
for sure.
think Jamie, you and I agree that at this point we would oppose legal recognition of sex change.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's our baseline. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Laurie, you would say you should. That's I would argue for a different baseline. That's what you would say.
I think society is better served by having a different baseline.
Okay. So
And
so what's your position?
so my position is that we talk, I often say, and it's true, that I'm a transmedicalist, meaning
Mm,
that I believe that gender dysphoria is a medical condition. It should be treated as a medical decision, and we should be looking at the best evidence for how to manage that condition, and but while still allowing physicians to make decisions based on what they think is the best interest in individual patient. That guidelines are guidelines. They're not prescriptive in terms of you must do this or you can't do that, and that they'll never be able to capture all the nuances and individual uh, uh, individual factors that might govern why a specific decision may potentially be beneficial in one person, not in another. I'm going to set that aside for now because I don't want to get all into medicalization.
mm,
But I also think I'm also a translegalist, which means that there should be some pathway, a narrow pathway, for recognition of that someone who is going through a certain amount of effort that leads them to be generally perceived as female, to be legally recognized as such. And the reason for that is I think there's pro-social value in that recognition. So someone like myself, like I said earlier on, I've had the benefit of being legally recognized as female where I live for the last 23 years. So that means that I live in society like this. My impression that I give people is generally one of being female. I've put a lot of work into making sure that I don't give off mixed signals as best as I can,
mm.
as at least to the extent of what's within my locus of control. I, as such, I don't have to make people uncomfortable, as an example, by when I check into a hotel, of having to show a piece of ID that is incongruent with the impression that I'm generally making on people. I don't have to, if I'm pulled over by the police, who I may not necessarily trust as being good faith people. I recognize most police are good, but people have different motivations. You're in that situation, you don't know what can happen. Of having to introduce gender incongruence into that interaction. When I'm crossing a border, I don't want to necessarily be set aside for extra scrutiny because I'm now seen as someone who has gender incongruence.
Mhm.
Um, because of those things, I have the ability to contribute more positively to society because I'm not weighed down by those factors. That being said, I don't think that's something that should be allowed just because someone says, I feel female in my heart. I think it should be something where someone who is looking at you, in order to get that designation, there's basically two things. One is you should be a safe individual. We've seen too many instances of people who grab onto this status of being female who are a danger to women.
Mm.
And people who have a history of violent or coercive behavior against women or of other markers of aggressiveness towards women that I would personally feel uncomfortable about having in a space with other women. Um, I don't think those people should be granted legal recognition of their of femaleness. We've seen
So
with
that
yeah. Go ahead.
just to clarify, that would be like if you had a criminal charge against you, or if later you caught a criminal charge for like sexual assault, you would say your privilege for having the sex marker has been revoked. Is that
Yeah.
what you
So
what
I
you'd
do
say?
see that legal recognition as being a privilege, and
Right.
and
Not a
so
right, it's a privilege.
not if whether you want to call it a privilege or you want to call it an accommodation,
Mhm.
either way, it's something that is earned and it's something that you can lose. So I look at it the same way as my medical license. It's
Mhm.
something like I can't, I can call myself a doctor all day, but unless I've met a certain set of criteria that allow me to practice medicine and be trusted to by the public to practice medicine, that I hold a medical license, it implies that there's an imprimatur of trust that society has given to me to practice medicine. I can lose that if
And that was the first condition. What was the second condition? I didn't let you get there.
um, the second condition is that you are at the very least putting a good faith effort into behaving as a woman. And I think the other thing is that it can be conditional for different spaces. And I think I know you've talked about this with other people. I think I think it's not only who you are, it's the venue. I think there's very different criteria to someone like me or a trans person, let's say using a woman's washroom where there's individual spaces where that person can control their behavior and respect the space versus being, let's say, in a change room where there's an expectation that people may be in various states of undress, or how this might apply to a prison as an example. These are three different venues, and I think three different standards that could be applied, just like you might have a driver's license that has conditions based on your. And I think fleshing like this whole thing about translegalism probably could involve an hours long discussion. But the point is when there are people like myself, and I'm not the only one, or people with the capacity of making positive
Yeah.
contributions to society, that we
All
should
right.
do what we can to accommodate those people.
So for your second condition, how does somebody know that if they've met it or not?
Um, so I think that I recognize what you're coming down into. Is it a passability standard? And personally, like if I could set the rules, I wouldn't make it a passability standard. I just say as long as this person is making a good faith effort, and I think we know what a good faith effort is. And if someone wants to call someone on their behavior, I think that's a totally different thing.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't think I know what a good faith effort is, and that is a good faith response. I
okay,
don't know what a good faith effort is.
okay. So what a good faith effort is, I can generally tell when someone is generally trying to uh, I can think of someone is generally trying, when someone is generally trying to look female. Now, you as a citizen might feel so obliged to call that out. So let's say you
Okay.
saw someone who you thought wasn't putting in a good faith effort, and you
All
felt
right.
obliged to call that person out. And let's say that person, you called security, or did something of that nature. So part of the thing about licensure in general is they tend to be self-policing. Like I don't have
Okay.
someone interacting with all my medical interactions to make sure that I'm practicing within the standards of medicine for every
Sure.
interaction. But there are ways of addressing it if you feel that there's been a standard that's been breached.
Sure. So let me try to
Okay.
read back to you, make sure I understand it. Then I want to get Jamie's response here. So the first condition is, and I'm sorry, I've repeat what you say the first condition is.
My first condition, or so my first condition is that you do have no record of any violent,
Right. No, so no
particularly
criminal record for a
yeah,
sex crime.
particularly against women. Yeah.
And the second one, and I'm going to change your wording a little bit, but I'm going to tell you the way that I heard it, and you tell me if you agree, and then we'll toss it to Jamie. The
Yeah.
second one is that there are certain social stereotypes for femininity, and if you're trying to enact those, and in not a ironic way, but in a deliberate way, then that would show other people that that's the good faith effort. Is that fair?
So I look at it a little bit different, which is because so right now we're moving to a stand like where that is sort of becoming a standard because if
Okay.
you're looking, let's say, at enforcing, let's say, a strict sex segregation policy that
Mhm.
is trying to, let's say, catch me.
All right.
Um,
I,
or
again, I want to make sure Jamie has a chance to
okay,
respond.
sorry,
So I want to keep this.
fair enough.
So am I sort of in the ballpark? Is it good enough
In
for
the
the
ballpark, but
discussion?
with some modifications.
Okay, okay. Jamie, what do you think?
I I want to start with explaining my position on what I believe should exist in society around, I'm going to use the phrase gender conformity.
Okay.
So I don't want to live in a society where the police the bouncer at the bar, the hotel clerk is in a position to give a rat's ass or police how people look, appear, or behave.
Okay, so I agree with you 100%. Let's
Okay,
start there.
so I want to blow open what is seen as how we have to conform to gender. So if someone appears or their mannerisms, if there is a male who is the most feminine presenting, wearing whatever the hell they want to wear, I don't care. Society should embrace and accept gender nonconformity as a natural, perfectly acceptable form of the human being.
Okay, I'm with
So
you.
I don't want anyone to go up to a hotel clerk with an ID that there would ever be a social policing of their appearance, or if they appear or speak feminine or have gestures or anything like that. I don't believe in socially policing gender conformity.
Okay, I don't either.
So we that's the society I want to move towards, where your ID should be able to have an M on it, regardless of how you appear, and you're never treated like shit by somebody because your appearance doesn't match up to how they believe gender should be policed. So a male can wear whatever they want, that is the way we blow open this gender policing. No police officer should pull someone over and go treat you any differently because you have long hair, feminine mannerisms, makeup on, jewelry, and a dress. That the M on that should make no difference to the way that someone is treated by the police. The only reason why the M should even be there, and this is where I would say if there is a way for us to back end sex markers, go ahead and back end them, because the place where it matters is not if you get pulled over. You shouldn't be treated any differently. But if you did break a law and then you're going to go to jail for the night, the only reason why anybody should care that there's an M on there is because you should be put into the M side of the jail as opposed to the F side of the jail, especially if there's going to be group housing involved on the back end. The only place where I feel like this matters is in bathrooms, changing rooms, prisons, jails, and hospitals. So I'm willing to say, A, nobody should have a legal pathway to change their sex, but I'm also willing to agree maybe it doesn't need to be on all of our front-facing documents. Maybe there's a way that if I am pulled over on my driver's license, there is no sex marker, but if I'm going to be booked into jail, there's a scan card that shows up and says you're legally recognized as I'm always to be legally recognized as female, and the only people or the only positions or places where that has to matter is where we as a society agree to sex segregate for those reasons: bathrooms, changing rooms, prisons, jails, hospitals. And I also think there was something you said about this goes into the medicalization. But to me, there's no way to legally judge or police effort or presentation, because I don't want to live in a society that judges anyone's if they're masculine or too feminine or too masculine. I don't want to judge anyone's presentation or the way you exist in the world or the way that your mannerisms. That's not the society I want to live in. I want to blow all of that open. If I could jump over for one line about the medicalization, and then I'll throw it back to you, Corey. I think you said guidelines are guidelines and not prescriptive. I worry about that because we have almost gone so far off the rails. The first thing when you said that, I imagined, well, guidelines now about how we treat someone with diabetes is that we would use insulin and a medical pathway, we would not put them in a room and revert to starving them and only giving them, like cabbage broth.
Okay.
Nobody would do that. It's not even in the guideline anymore. But how do you make sure that when you say it's not prescriptive, how do you make sure that there's still some guardrails up that we don't go do the crazy things that some of the doctors have done?
Yeah.
So I'm really interested if we could blow open these concepts around gender presentation, if you would not feel like the way you're treated is at risk, could we not have sex not have to be changed on the back end of a legal format? I don't know
So,
why a birth certificate would ever have to legally change if you could
yeah.
present your gender in any way you wish and not be mistreated.
Yeah. So, I, I know you wanted to toss to Corey first.
No, go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh,
So I think there's a few different elements there, and I'm going to put the medicalization part aside just for now. But to come back to the legal status, which is that, um, like I was saying, like I was agreeing with you as you were saying it, I agree that ideally that there's probably no purpose served any longer for having gender indicators on like the front of a license or a passport. There's other ways that people can be easily identified that don't necessarily, we're moving to biometrics. There's embedded chips. There's other things that can be done that don't require in 2025 for that piece of information to be on the front of a license or on the front of a passport or on some other papers. And you're also correct that I don't want to live in a papers please environment where people are having to present evidence of their sex class in order to access a space. And I do also agree with you that this is pertinent information in many contexts. And we can argue about what those contexts are, but I believe, like I've said earlier in the conversation, the fact that I was a natal male is important in certain contexts. It's important knowledge when making certain medical decisions. I'm not going to argue my way out of that. What I would say, back to your other point, is about those spaces, which I know you're and many women are very protective of, is that there should be a path for people who are good people, who are trying to live pro-social lives, who are trying to make contributions to society, to not put them in environments that tell them that they are lesser than.
But why is
So, so,
the men's bathroom telling you you're lesser than?
so, what do you think happens when I go into the men's washroom?
But see, that's what I want to change.
Okay,
Why
so
is it
so
that
we're
gender,
talking about
why
an
is it
audience.
that
We're talking about an audience issue here. Like, would I like to sort of deconstruct society and put the right thoughts in everybody's mind, so that if someone who looks like me and behaves like me and presents like me, because that's just who I am, if I go into a male space where I find myself in a male prison, or if I find myself in a male change room, I would love it if we lived in the society that you have sort of conjured, in your mind's eye.
Yeah.
Um, that's the difference between ought, should, and is. We don't. And it's unlikely to be the case. As much as I'd like to make all men all a certain way to be, and I recognize there's this campaign where it's like, oh, come in, bro. You can use the washroom with me. I'll respect you even if you look like this. And maybe those guys are good people. On balance, that's not what happens. And I'm not saying so for someone like myself who is pro-social, who poses no actual risk to women, and where I'm getting a certification that basically says, that that there is that the risk that someone like that, people like me, because a lot of what you're referring to and a lot of the danger comes from people who are not legally female,
Yeah.
but who are using loopholes because of self ID to work their way into those spaces. So part
Uh,
of having a trans legal structure also involves having a punitive structure, which is what happens. Like, I'll come back to licensure. What happens if I practice medicine without a license? What happens when I drive without a license? Now, you don't know when you go on the road who has a license and who doesn't. You don't know who's a good driver and who is not a good driver. But you use the road because you have general trust that we have a system of licensure that generally tells you that if someone is behind the wheel of the car, that they've met some standard. And if they are not, And the reason why there aren't isn't that we are checking a driver's license every time someone steps behind the wheel, but it's because we know there is a system of punitive, there is a punitive system that imposes strict penalties on people who transgress, in the event that they are called out on it. And that is not, I'm not saying it's perfect,
Yeah.
but I believe on a whole, by the way society is right now, that forcing someone who looks like me, who is a pro-social person, who is contributing positively to society, to compel me to use a male-only space, or to compel me, like, I'll give an example. Let's say I'm at a protest. I'm not doing anything violent. I'm at a okay, I'm doing something and I get picked up by ICE agents or whatever, and I end up in prison. Wait, like, if you have any concern for my well-being as a person, where do you think is best served? Putting the other
So
aside, yeah.
I've been mostly facilitating in this conversation, but I do want to jump in here a little bit because I think this is particularly a conversation that should be happening more in the trans space.
Absolutely.
I believe that it's impossible to have any sort of policy that interrogates the intentions of the people to whom it applies. And therefore, I have realistically made the assessment that the policy, in any policy that exists, has to cover all of the good people and all of the bad people and apply to them both. That the policy cannot discern based on intention. I have come to believe that.
Yeah.
Do you think that maybe I'm misguided and that it's possible to have policies that are also can X-ray into the intention of the person to whom they apply?
I think there are policies that, on balance, like, if you're trying to create a perfect system where no bad thing ever happens,
No.
yeah, you will not create that. If you're trying to create a policy that creates the most good for the most people, then I think there's a
I want to clarify because I see where you're going. What I want to make sure is that the policy can be applied equally. Forget what it accomplishes. I want to make sure that it can be applied equally.
Where there's not sort of a subjective standard.
Correct. Where this is why passability is such a difficult type of conversation or an impossible standard. We can't use passability.
Yeah, and I
as a
agree.
standard.
I don't want to use passability. I recognize passability is often what will be used as a way to catch interlopers. Now that's going to happen under the current regime anyways, because
So like an unlicensed driver who drives well is passing as a licensed driver, for example.
Yes.
But we want policies that since we can't know the intention, we want policies that apply equally.
Yeah. So I would say is the main criteria should be, if you were creating a policy that the two compromises that would have to be made is that this is a status like a license that can be taken away and granted, and that we don't have to discuss the specific criteria. I wouldn't make them passability, but whether it is sort of the same way with the driver's license, you have to show that you're capable of driving for 2 years, let's say, without infractions before you get your full licensure, or where you have to that you would get granted that is, and if you were appropriately medicalized, and you could, and like I'm saying, we can sort of get into the fine details, but that there is some criteria that is objective that could be applied, and part of that then is the recognition, just like when I go into a women's washroom now, I do use a women's washroom. When I go into a women's washroom now, sometimes people come in who scare me, right? I'm not saying it's necessarily because they look male. There's a variety of different reasons why someone might evoke a fear response to me in a vulnerable space.
Like if they're dressed in Antifa clothes. I'm kidding. Keep going.
Whatever. We all have our triggers. Facial tattoos.
Right.
Some people have whatever intrinsic biases against people of different ethnic backgrounds and get a fear response because someone is wearing an item of dress that might be associated with, you mentioned Antifa clothes, but there's other things that might signify this person as a potential threat.
Sure.
And we have to live with that threat. The issue is where I would look at this is more on how do we enforce like drunk driving laws, which is it's not at are you using, or do I have to, am I entering? But if I do something bad and I am transgressing my privilege to be there, that the
Mm.
penalty is severe. So the same way that if you drive a car and you get into an accident, there's one set of penalties. If you get into a car and are under the influence of alcohol and drugs and get into that same accident, the penalties are severe. And that
Yes.
acts as enough of inducement so people don't do bad things. And part of the social contract that comes along with that is recognizing that sometimes people may come into your space who might look odd. And to recognize that if they're in there, that they probably have the right to be there. Because right now, if your policy preference comes in,
Isn't that the reverse then?
well, but it's two sides of the same coin. If your
But
policy,
I mean, like, if you're saying like somebody looks odd, but they have the right to be there, I guess I don't understand why.
well, that's kind of what you were saying at the beginning, Jamie, which is that you know, even if you look within a sex class, as you say, there are females can take on any variety number of appearance, including looking quite masculine. And if we want to stick with sort of strict sex class masculinization, I mean, that includes people, let's say, who are F to M, who are going to look very masculine, and depending on other parts of their habitus, might strike you as being male. And under your preferred policy preferences, those people would have access to that space. Now, they may not choose to exercise it.
I think you're missing the other point, which is that I do not support the medicalization aspect of anyone either. And so when I'm talking about gender conformity,
Yeah.
uh,
So you think there is a path that I could have lived that would have brought me equivalent comfort, let's say, and an equivalent sense, and would have solved my dysphoria to the point that I would have been able to live with it in a way. All I needed to do was not go on hormones and not do any interventions that um, uh, would have made me look female. And I would have been able to, or either I would have been able to live and maximize my ability to pursue happiness, or I would have just had to say, you know what, you don't get the right to pursue happiness because I think it's much more important that you stay within your lane. So that I think that there's some principles of liberalism that I think are getting transgressed there, and that's separate from legal status. Um, that because you feel that everybody
can I
should, and
answer?
I use the word should again, should find a way to feel comfortable with their gender without medicalization, without surgical procedures, that is just the choice. Now, I recognize, and I don't want to speak to Corey, I'm guessing you've gotten to that place. I personally don't think that place would have existed for me. Um, Now you can doubt that. You can say that there was a path, and maybe I just didn't give myself the chance just to be a very effeminate male, and I could have found a way to live that way and found a happy life and been a gay guy, a hyper feminine gay male, and come to work with sort of masculine features and nothing that would have signified that I'm trying to be female, that people would have seen me as an obvious male that's practicing effeminacy, and that would have been fine for me. And I'd tell you, you're dead wrong. And I think a lot of people would tell you that too. And that's also the difference between should and is.
So my response to that would be that most of the evidence would inform me that the pathway that you are stating brought you that happiness. Um, some of the evidence shows that that reported happiness shows up as soon as step one is done in the same almost equal measure as step three and step four, that it is
So
that there is
what's step one here? Is step one saying just taking on a more feminine appearance without
no, oftentimes let me try this again.
yeah.
That the on balance position for the support of a medical pathway, to me, the evidence does not prove that it is the panacea or a pathway that the medical establishment should support regardless of age.
So I think
There will
yeah.
and there will probably never be legal bans to access for adults of cross-sex hormones or some of those surgeries, but that as a society as a whole, I do not support an insurance pathway that supports paying for those things or a legal pathway that then recognizes any change of sex having occurred because of those things.
Yeah. So those are two different things. So the first is, just to pick a little bit of, so do I think it's panacea? No. I don't think transition is necessarily the best option for everybody with gender dysphoria. I think these decisions should be individualized, and it really depends what that person's goals are, and what that person is hoping to attain. Because I recognize, for instance, for myself, that part of the reason my transition was successful in terms of both bringing me happiness and allowing me to function in society and contribute positively to society was because of I was able to do it in a way that allowed me to dodge a lot of stigma, and allowed me to
The stigma that I want to blow apart, that you could have.
Yeah, but it's
okay,
but it's still there.
it's there.
Yeah,
It's there.
yes,
Like
but if we
if I
don't
want if I
try as a
wanted to,
society to do that and we put it on your individual body to have to undergo those changes, I still think there is a way that society could move forward so that you could be
yeah. So
the feminine presenting gay
yeah,
man
yeah.
and
So I
embrace
think that
his
there's two elements
soul.
here. But one is I think even in a utopia society, in one where there was no stigma associated with being gender variant or gender incongruent in your appearance, is not one that I would have been, is still one where I would have pursued transition. Um, and the reasons for that is it's not just about not being stigmatized, it's about who I want it to be and how I want to present myself in the world. And
Mhm.
that's a very different thing. Like, yes, in your perfect world, in your gender utopia, where that you would somehow will into existence or try to take incremental steps towards willing to existence, is still one where people like me are going to seek to transition because we do not see ourselves as effeminate men. We see ourselves as people who want to the best ability that technology allows to see ourselves as women or as female, and to be generally perceived as being female. And that's something that no effeminate man can have. Now, if that is someone's goal, if someone is happy and can find happiness with being an effeminate man, then I think that's the pathway they should choose. And I also think that moving back to the real world, where stigma exists, and as much as we'd like to eradicate it, it's not going to happen tomorrow, the next day, next year, in the next 10 years, and probably the next 100. That there are certain people where I would tell them objectively that if you pursue this path, life is going to be very hard. You are not going to get what you want because of bodily factors, because of the resources that you have access to are not necessarily going to allow you to get the surgeries that you think you need that will allow you not to be stigmatized in current society. That stigma is going to impose consequences on your life. It's going to impose consequences in terms of your ability to form relationships. It's going to impose consequences in terms of your ability to hold work and contribute economically to society. It is likely going to impose consequences in the amount of distress that it's going to cause you. And you have to be aware of that. If you're making an informed consent decision, you have to be aware of what your life may be like if you choose this path. And it may be the better choice to be partial measures. Maybe take hormones but don't pursue social transition. Maybe pursue some embodiment goals and not others. Or maybe recognize, because of your own values and preferences, that yes, I am willing to lose all those things because this is important to me. Um, and these are
Good ad there of the values and
yeah,
preferences.
and
Yeah.
this is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If we value a liberal society where people get to make the choices that allow them to maximize their own happiness as long as it doesn't impose significant impositions on other people, that
So
we
isn't that the rub though? So isn't that where it goes from being an individual decision to a societal based decision? Is that we're saying now the
I guess
rub has become that
if the
those
rub is you might
individual.
have to occasionally look at someone who's gender incongruent, then sure. Um,
No, 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 no. Wait. Say that again.
I said if the rub, like, so let's say,
No, that's not the rub. The rub. See again,
okay,
I embrace that gender incongruence.
well, not totally, because you are saying that you don't want someone like me taking hormones because those induce too much of a change and it puts it
No,
in
no,
tandem.
No, that's
Uh,
not why I don't want you taking
okay,
hormones.
so let me give you some space to reiterate then.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's not why I don't want you to take hormones. I don't want you to take hormones because I want gender nonconforming and homosexual individuals to be able to grow up with their bodies whole, complete, intact, and healthy. And I see most of the outcomes of these interventions to be in some ways removing us from our bodies and harming our bodies in some sense. I wanted you to have a pathway to have the most openness for gender expression that we could possibly give you, and other homosexuals that they would never have felt the need to physically change their body
Yeah.
because of that
So
stigma.
I would say there's a very different desire that's driving my behavior than just gender nonconformity. Because I don't want to be gender non. I want to be gender conforming. That's my preference.
Why though? Why? If
Um,
your natural inclination is to be gender nonconforming,
well, it's
what
not.
is it that we, no,
Not.
no, no, but what is it that we pushed on you as a society that would paint you to want that other route?
I don't think anyone pushed that on me as a society. I think this is just something that, you're a lesbian, right? Um, who pushed that on you?
Oh, you know how lesbians are.
So,
Yeah,
so who
I
pushed it on
got, yeah, Ani DeFranco, the Indigo Girls, they
you? Okay,
totally, yeah.
okay, so some sort of contagion.
Wasn't it Ellen?
Yeah,
I was not an Ellen. I had hippie parents. I didn't really get to watch TV besides public broadcasting.
what I'm guessing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that your sense of your desire, and your attraction to other women, was something, if not innate, something that developed early in your life, or something that
Because I was also gender nonconforming as a child.
that may be, but I think that's on a separate axis because not everyone who's lesbian is necessarily gender nonconforming. But 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 the point is that my
But most of the naturally gender
yeah,
nonconforming kids will grow up to
my
be.
cross-sex desire was not societally driven. It was intrinsic. Now, what triggered it early in my life, I don't know. I presumably had some pre-existing predisposition to it, and perhaps some sort of early life exposure. Who knows what that is? That triggered it in me. That gave me a strong sense of cross-sex desire. Now that wasn't because I grew up in the 70s and 80s. It wasn't from the internet. It wasn't from TV shows. It was, or if it was, it certainly wasn't by intent. It was something that happened, and it became a core part of my being, and not because I developed a desire that I wanted to be a girl and eventually I wanted to be a woman, and it wasn't the and being a effeminate man was not going to do it for me because that's not how I was wired. Now, if someone is wired that way, that's fine. If someone is a twink and wants to be an effeminate man, that's perfectly fine. That's a perfectly valid way of being, and I'm not trying to change that person into something else. Um, my desire was not for that, and so even like as just to go back to that last point, even in your version of the world, where you sprinkle your fairy dust and everybody sort of is captured in the thrall and recognizes all forms of gender nonconformity and passes no judgment on it, I still end up not wanting to be a gender nonconforming male. And most
So
people who pursue this path end up not wanting to be a gender nonconforming.
I want to
Yeah,
be aware of the time because
yeah.
we're
I've
a
got a
bit
little bit of
past the
time.
hour.
I don't know if we're boring your listeners to death, but I've got time. Okay, who bet on cat?
Yeah, the cat bell has rung.
Yeah.
Would you mind any final thoughts? Any not a could be on this topic or it could be anything on anything else, but I think we should wrap up here with your last thoughts, particularly not me or Jamie. What would you like to say directly to our audience?
Um, what I'd like to say directly, sorry, in terms of directly your audience, recognizing that the image of trans people that often gets put in front of you, that often gets platformed, and because it is lurid, and because it is of prurient interest, is not the lived experience of many trans people, or perhaps even of most trans people. That most trans people are good people. Most trans people are law-abiding people. Most trans people are or even if they're not necessarily trying to be conforming like I am in terms of being binary, are trying to make positive, are trying to attain what they believe is the best version of themselves. and
Mhm.
ideally, in a fair world, are going to make positive contributions to society, and then we should look at giving them the space to do so. I think when you go online and are intentionally vicious and are intentionally contemptuous and place your prejudices based on sort of the lurid images or the worst of us, to base your judgment of all trans people, you're not giving trans people like me and the thousands of people like me the fair shake, and also you're denying people the opportunity who want to pursue the path of ending up in a place like me of doing that. I think we build a better society when we don't treat trans people inherently with contempt and assume the worst about them. Um,
Well, I want to thank you for that because I don't want you to ever feel like, from our perspective, there's any contempt or desire for you not to have a full functioning life in society. Um, and I really appreciate the modeling of this conversation. Um, I would hope that we could try to do this again sometime too.
Yeah, I'd love to come back. Like I said, I think a lot of the things that I was anticipating talking about the more contentious things, we never actually got to. We didn't get to talk about, about my views on pediatric medical transition, or about, is it even right for me as a physician to frame myself as a female doctor, which is about where we're going to go today. Anyways, those conversations can be had potentially another time. But I also agree, like just taking a little bit on my community. I think if more people in my community had the capacity, and I recognize that a lot of our people are under stress and don't always have this capacity, but had the capacity to have these honest conversations, we probably wouldn't be at the position we are right now. And I think this goes for both sides. And I'd like to see more of these conversations appearing. So if I can log roll for one thing, I do have a podcast that I'm going to be starting up with actually a lovely gender critical woman named Yvette Neri, where we are going to be trying to model these conversations. It's called Agree to Disagree About Gender. Our first episode is going to be coming out on Monday, December 22nd. We're going to be talking about women's faces, but over time, we're going to have conversations about many of these issues from the perspective of people who are not necessarily judging each other for their beliefs, but are trying to understand how we got there, and to let the listener decide who makes the more compelling case.
And where
I,
else can people find you?
So they can find us on YouTube, and it's also going to be on Apple and Spotify. And we're going to be posting our content to Twitter/X.
well,
And
I think
sure,
it's
go ahead, Corey.
past time for there to be a podcast with a gender critical woman and a person of trans experience on
Oh,
the other side.
Corey.
No,
Oh, you mean on the other side? Okay.
On the other, but we're
Corey,
having
Corey
conversations.
has another podcast called, yeah.
I know your other podcast. I listen to it too.
thank you so much for
You're
joining
very
us.
welcome.
I hope everybody in our audience gives your podcast a shot.
I hope they do
I know I
too.
will.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. And happy Hanukkah, fifth night. Celebrate with your family and with your cats. And I don't know what you celebrate, Reed, but happy holidays to your people, to your
Thank
brood.
you very much. Thank you for coming.
You're very welcome.
Hi, all. It's Jamie Reed at the end of another episode. Before we wrap, we want to acknowledge something honestly. This week had a lot flying at us all at once. The pace of this week really felt harried already going in, and we still chose to take a swing at something. We welcomed a guest with a very different perspective because we believe dialogue matters, even when it's uncomfortable. It didn't go as smoothly as we hoped. There was less back and forth than we wanted, and it sometimes felt more disjointed than illuminating. We actually considered scrapping this and trying to reinvite our guest. But we came to the conclusion that we see this as a try, and we wanted to let you hear it, and we wanted your feedback because we think that these attempts still matter. We also want to say plainly that we missed Lauren this week. When one of us is out, we do become a little bit disjointed. We work together well as a team. But we also didn't want to turn this conversation into a 3 against 1 dynamic that just looked or felt unfair from the start. The choices that we make each week shape how these conversations unfold, for better or for worse. We also want this to be a place where the newly interested, the curious, the liberal listeners can come and feel welcome. We want to show that you can suggest to your neighbor or your still affirming relative. And that does sometimes mean we're going to slow down, we're going to miss a beat, we're going to learn in real time how to hold firm disagreements without shutting the door on conversation. So, all of that to say, we're a work in progress. What this did raise is a bigger question that we would genuinely like your help thinking through. How do we do real disagreement well? How do we create a space for conflict that doesn't turn into yelling? When everyone just yells over one another, nothing gets resolved. But also, it doesn't just turn into these parallel monologues that never seem to quite meet. So, if you're a conflict resolution expert, a debate coach, if you're part of an organization like Braver Angels or something similar, we would love to hear from you in the comments. We want to get better at this, not retreat from this. So, we're going to take next week off for the holiday. We'll be back the following week. If you value this show, even when it's messy, please like, subscribe, and rate this podcast and share it. Your support really does matter. And as always, thank you for listening. Stay informed and ready to dissent.